For over the past 60 years, Arizona PBS has told incredible stories of Arizona's distinctive people, beautiful landscapes, and treasured history. Now relive those memories we've pulled from the vault. Hello, I'm Alberto Rios. It was a decade of explosive growth, from developers carving new towns out of the desert to director Alfred Hitchcock setting his sights on Phoenix for a horror classic. Walk back in time to when Arizona began to make its mark on the map in Arizona Memories from the 60s.
In 1960, Alfred Hitchcock sent a film crew to Phoenix to shoot the opening scenes of Psycho, which immortalized the city's skyline in all its low-profile splendor. In the movie, Janet Leigh works where the money was in 1960s Phoenix, a real estate office.
Hey, you girls ought to get your boss to air condition you up. You can afford it today.
There's money, all right, and she's tempted to steal it. Of course, this is fiction. A real Arizonan would have gotten richer by investing in Paradise Valley. Janet Leigh's character drives through the intersection of Central and Washington, then, as now, the center of Phoenix, where anything can happen. And just like Alfred Hitchcock, hey, I'm in my own show. Hi, I'm Pat McMahon, and welcome to Arizona Memories from the 1960s. In the Valley of the Sun, it was a time of change and a time of contrasts. Big money crossed paths with youthful innocence. And what people remember most fondly was the innocence.
And really, it was just kind of a big green irrigated valley full of groves, olive groves, orange groves. You know, we used to pick oranges off the trees on our way to school every day, and tangerines, and I mean, we had more vitamin C than anybody else in the country, I think.
We'd hunt rabbits out and around the Wrigley Mansion at the Biltmore. That was a big thing to do. We'd go out, first when we were little kids, we'd hunt them with bows and arrows and never get close.
Here's a couple of riders really decked out, real Western.
We lived for the parade and the fair. It was Western week. You got to wear Western clothes all week long. That was exciting, you know. Got to wear pants. If you were downtown and you were caught in regular work clothes, not in Western attire, they'd put you in a little jail, makeshift jail, and then your friends would have to bail you out.
When we had relatives visit here when we were kids, they'd say they were coming to a hick town.
It was definitely a slower pace of a lifestyle, and most definitely a smaller type of a smaller town feeling, if you will.
We choose to go to the moon.
The 60s began with a new president and a new spirit. The youthful, suntanned John F. Kennedy was a perfect fit with America's optimistic outlook.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
America had emerged from World War II with surging prosperity. People felt free to search for a better life. Veterans who had been stationed at the Sun Belt now moved their young families to these sunny climates. And no other part of the Sun Belt could quite compete with the mystique of the West. Old West, New West, it all blended in the public imagination as a land of possibility, where a person was free to be who he wanted to be. The rising star of the West was Phoenix. No longer a quiet farming community, the city reached 500,000 residents by the early 60s. Families migrated from California, Texas, and the Midwest, and not just for the climate.
Get away from the steel mills, you know. I mean, life was hectic back there. And people never left home. Generation after generation stayed right there. Son, father, grandfather, everyone worked at the same job. And this was, you know, again, go west, young man.
Time Magazine, Newsweek, business magazines, everything said this was the place where a guy could go and make it.
And one of the reasons why people moved here was to get away. was not only to find jobs and opportunity, but to get away from the crowded, hustling, bustling nature of urban areas on the East Coast and in urban areas in the South. And when they moved to Phoenix, they erected walls, and they wanted to sort of have some time alone under this big western sky.
What benefits Arizona benefits Phoenix, and what benefits Phoenix benefits Arizona.
Growth. It was all about growth. That had been defined years earlier, frankly, by the city fathers. Anything they could do to help further growth, to fuel growth, was really a matter of city policy.
I think we were trying to build a great community. We wanted a good economic base, wanted good government, wanted a clean place to live, and basically believe in the free enterprise system. If you don't grow, you sometimes die, and a lot of cities have gone through that.
Phoenix used every legal loophole to annex huge tracts of land. In 1960 alone, the city swallowed 75 square miles in one bite.
And they gave great breaks. I mean, tremendous breaks, especially to industry. To get a Honeywell to come into town, or Motorola to expand and so forth, they would annex these large areas of open space, and they say, okay, we'll put in the large sewer piping and other such things, and we'll give you tax breaks if you'll develop in these areas. Well, as soon as it was known that a Honeywell or a Motorola was going to go in there, then the housing developers would say, great place to build housing.
Annexation benefited Phoenix by keeping money in the city and broadening the tax base. But the annexation tactics outraged communities like Scottsdale, which took the city to court, only to face the Phoenix Special Counsel, Dow Ben-Rausch.
He had a string during that period of time of over 20 cases. He won them all. And the city won them all, frankly. So he was very proud of that for many years.
The city annexed another 35 square miles by the end of the decade.
Really, it seems like the only way that we could have fueled all of this growth was with more growth. And how does this all work? I don't understand. It seems like it's all built on air, but it's never stopped. Phoenix has had some downtimes, the SNL crisis in the 80s and so forth, but it has been one sustained boom since the mid-50s to the present. And the 60s were absolutely the biggest boom of all.
Leapfrogging from one annexation to the next left residents living in a bewildering mix of houses, farms, and desert.
And I was always amazed with how the country and the city just was intertwined. You were in a cotton field one minute and in a department store the next.
The city was dominated by a handful of powerful individuals like attorney Frank Snell and banker Walter Bimson, men who could make things happen with handshake deals. Carl Eller was just a 30-year-old newcomer when he decided to go into business for himself with an outdoor advertising company. All he needed was $5 million.
And I remember going to the Valley Bank and going to see Walter Bimson, who was the chairman of the bank, and I remember showing him my projections and my business plan and everything, and he looked at me and he said, I think you're going to go a long ways, son, and shook my hand, and that was the deal.
In the age before blow dryers were invented, big hair had additional challenges.
Okay, so we wash our hair and put our hair in these gigantic rollers and go out for the day on a Saturday. We usually go to Christown and hang out, waiting for our hair to dry so we could go out that night. I thought, oh, brother. We must have looked like, total idiots, big, huge rollers, like tin cans, and then these scarves around our head.
For thousands of Valley residents, Saturday night meant just one thing: football.
ASU is the place to be on a Saturday night.
Yeah, Sun Devil football. What else is there? That was just awesome.
Arizona State played its first season as a university in 1959, and the team leaped to prominence in the 60s under coach Frank Kush.
The fans here, to me, were fantastic. You know, we came up from Old Goodwin Stadium, came up to Sun Devil Stadium, and it was about 30,000. They were all sellouts. And the great thing about it, we were the only act in town.
And when you played one of Frank Kush's teams, you knew you were in a game. You know, they left nothing off the field. They took it there. They brought the whole thing. And they were exciting games to watch.
And of course, just like anything else, you got to win.
The growing university provided culture in the desert, both in the classroom and on television.
This is Channel 8, Arizona's newest educational television station.
¿Qué hora es, por favor?
KAET went on the air in 1961.
For instance, you can see on the board,
serving up educational programming in glorious black and white.
a patient at the present time costs $5 per day per patient.
Now, Mr. Longstreth, could you tell us, basically, what is the difference between stocks and bonds?
Until tomorrow evening, then, good night from sociology.
ASU also connected with America's most esteemed and controversial architect, Frank Lloyd Wright, who had established his Taliesin West studios north of Scottsdale in the 1930s. The personal relationship between Wright and ASU President Grady Gamage led to the design of a performing arts auditorium that bears the Gamage name.
You know, people talk about Gamage as being acoustically excellent and so forth and so on, but like anything that he touched, it has a magnetism which is quite special, and it translates across international boundaries.
In fact, the design was truly international. It was based on Wright's earlier design for an opera house in Baghdad, Iraq.
And how bizarre it seemed to everybody. That was, you know, there was a lot of concern. That was pretty extreme. There was a lot of comment in the paper about this very strange building, and why did it have to be so weird, and it didn't fit anything else on the campus.
But as the premier music auditorium in the Valley, it stood out as a landmark commitment to the arts.
Can you imagine a campus without it? You can't.
He was a magician, you know. I mean, he managed to make things happen that aren't exactly explainable by methods and materials.
Local developer Del Webb was among Arizona's foremost builders, with a resume that included office towers, the Pink Flamingo Motel in Las Vegas, and Minuteman missile silos. But his real fame in the 60s came from turning a 10,000-acre cotton field into Sun City. No other developer had exploited the housing market for retirees with a development as large as this, and no one was sure it would work.
One of the problems that we knew we were going to run into was to try to get an elderly person to leave a city where they had lived for all their lives. But we thought if we could develop it on such a scale that when they came out, saw what they were going to get, the weather, everything else, why they would make that move.
So the company conceived of an affordable community segregated by age. It was orderly and spotless, near a city yet insulated from urban problems, with ample opportunities for recreation and socializing. People didn't just buy a house, they bought a way of life. Then the company took the modern tactic of sending a marketing researcher to Florida to survey retirees.
And when he came back, he said one of the biggest problems that he ran into was that the people were unhappy because the developer either didn't do what he said he was going to do, or he did it on a much smaller basis. So we decided if we were going to get into a Sun City or retirement community, the best thing for us to do was to put all of the amenities in ahead of time.
The company poured money into building a golf course, shopping center, rec center, and restaurant. It spent even more on national publicity. A film produced in the early 60s reveals the marketing strategy, which portrayed retirement as a dull, lonely existence, with senior citizens plagued by rowdy neighborhood kids.
It broke.
So this is retirement. Time on your hands, with no place to go. There must be something else.
Ben?
I know. Let's go to Arizona.
I wondered if she felt all right. Arizona, of all places. Why not Timbuktu?
But he has a change of heart and heads out to Phoenix. Not surprisingly, the characters discover that Sun City is a haven from winter, boredom, and urban problems.
This was one of the fullest, most rewarding days I've had in months. And for the first time in months, I was looking forward to tomorrow.
But back on opening day, January 1st, 1960, no one really knew how fast those lots would sell.
We wondered whether anybody was going to come, and we got out there early, and then we heard that there was a traffic jam from 107th Avenue almost all the way back to Peoria. So I called secretaries as best I could in the Webb Company and also executives, and I got receipt books from Safeway, and I passed them out to the executives and secretaries, and I said, just get a lot number and $500 and the people's name and address, and we'll call them later. So that's how we did.
Sun City became an immediate success, and most residents loved living there.
Del Webb put a new twist on it, made it almost sexy to be elderly, white, and segregated. But I think in terms of the growth of the Northwest Valley and the growth of an idea as Arizona as a retirement center rivaling California and Florida, it was the work of pure genius.
Scottsdale entered the 60s by way of the 1880s, polishing its fictional image as the West's most western town. Horse-loving residents enjoyed the motif almost as much as the tourists. The arts and crafts galleries helped bring about the rebirth of cowboy art. But the City Fathers had a larger vision of Scottsdale as an upscale resort community. They made the West look hip. It was a winning formula, and Scottsdale became Phoenix's biggest competitor for growth. Arizonans began to make the national scene. In 1965, Vonda K. Van Dyke was crowned Miss America, proving that Arizonans could look good in a tiara.
I'm competing for Miss America. What are you going to do for talent?
Vonda K. Van Dyke was the big deal. We used to drive by and say, that's Vonda K. Van Dyke's house. You know, that's where she has her hair done. That's, you know, where her dog is groomed. I mean, it was like she was this role model that, look, you know, we can compete. We can be on that level.
Arizonan Frank Borman was named to the elite group of Gemini astronauts. Stuart Udall, the son of a prominent Mormon family, joined the Kennedy administration as Secretary of the Interior. And the national spotlight burned brightest when Senator Barry Goldwater ran for president in 1964. Although he lost to Lyndon Johnson, his campaign magnified Arizona's image.
It put us on the map. I've got friends that are from Texas, and they always say, yeah, back when Barry ran for president, that's when they realized that Arizona was what Texas wanted to be. That they were, you know, there was this independence here. There was this Wild West kind of legacy, but there was also civilization and a calmness, I think, to people who are in this state.
There seemed to be only one limit to growth, and that was water. Without water, the future was frightening.
No cotton, no citrus, or cattle. No Phoenix. No miracle in the desert. If it weren't for water.
So the Central Arizona Project, or CAP, was conceived to provide an endless supply of water.
The dream of putting water in Central Arizona goes back to the territorial period. Water is life. That's a cliche. It could be hackneyed, but if we don't have Central Arizona Project water, or the very idea of Central Arizona Project water coming into Arizona, what companies are going to relocate here? What semiconductor plants would relocate here if you don't have water and cheap federal water?
The Central Arizona Project was an engineering marvel with a hefty price tag, $6 billion. It was a project so big, it was the culmination of Arizona Senator Carl Hayden's 50 years in Congress.
And it's bipartisan. It really is a bipartisan issue. Water isn't Republican, it isn't Democrat, it's green, it's money, and it's jobs.
The irony was that Arizonans, with their tradition of rugged individualism, were traditionally opposed to accepting federal handouts.
Well, this state wouldn't exist if it wasn't for the federal government. It started out as a territorial, and when it developed, you know, between the Army and everything else, it's always, and that always used to amuse me, is that here they'd say, we don't send that money back to Washington, and you know, it's wrong, and we did it. Rugged individualism. We did it all by ourselves, but there isn't a damn thing in the state of Arizona that hadn't been helped by the federal government. I don't care whether it's highways, water, water, power, you name it. The federal government's been a part of it.
However you slice the pie, Phoenix in the mid-60s was bursting with success.
I can remember when the signs were changed from 500,000 to 800,000, and we were all just appalled. You know, where is it going to end? How much bigger could it possibly get?
In 1965, Frank Borman was hurled into space.
Run away, Frank.
Borman looked down at Arizona, the place he called home. Easy to spot because of the Colorado River, the state looked big and full of opportunity. Back on Earth, Valley boosters were thinking big was never big enough. The Valley was due for greater changes. By the mid-60s, Phoenix could rightly call itself a major city. It had the population, it had the wealth, and it had a Playboy Club.
The Playboy Club, when it opened, was a really big event in town. This was big city stuff coming to Phoenix, and we were really quite impressed that we were grown up enough to have this in our city. I remember seeing the little girls with their bunny suits and their little tails, and being, you know, it was kind of showbiz.
Most of them were from Phoenix. Remember one specifically was a graduate of Arizona State. Had others who were students here at ASU. It was pretty good as a single guy managing the Phoenix Playboy Club. You know, it was a lot of fun. I had a lot of fun with that.
So everybody was kind of enamored of it for a while. It didn't stay very long, but it had quite an impact when it arrived.
Kids, on the other hand, had a limited choice of entertainment in the 60s.
We played outside a lot. That was it. I mean, we didn't do a lot in the house. There wasn't really anything on TV. We just played outside.
Airport, that was the other thing to do. Go and watch planes land and take off. We did that a lot.
But life perked up when Legend City opened across the street from Papago Park.
It was like taking a very long drive from 10th Street and Camelback to Legend City. It was like going to California. Truly, we took water. I mean, it was it was a long drive, but it was a great place to go. It was a lot of fun. It was like our Disneyland. Didn't last, unfortunately. It went away.
Legend City's neighbor was the new Phoenix Zoo. True to the independent spirit of Arizonans, it was one of the few major zoos in the country funded without federal dollars. The idea came from local philanthropist Bob Maytag. To bring in donations, he and his supporters in Phoenix society would go anywhere to publicize the zoo.
It would be a disaster in terms of federal regulations today, but they took animals from the zoo all over the valley.
Donations flowed in. And in its opening week in November 1962, the zoo hosted 35,000 visitors. The gorillas were a favorite attraction and became a national news story when Hazel's mate Mongo died of valley fever in 1969.
The assumption was that that she was in grief and pining away for her boyfriend.
National press coverage helped find a mate in Baltimore. But the zoo didn't have the money to transport the gorilla, now called Baltimore Jack, to Phoenix.
In Chicago, Playboy publisher Hugh Hefner heard about it and came forward with an offer to allow us to use his bunny plane to do the deed. The bunny plane arrives at Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport with an appropriate number of bunnies and one very carefully sedated Baltimore Jack.
It was deemed appropriate that I go out there and take some of the bunnies out in their promotional costumes and, you know, and greet the animal when he got off the plane. But to greet a gorilla just really wasn't something that I had the lifelong ambition to do. It didn't fit my image, you know. I didn't think it fit my image at all.
Hazel and Baltimore Jack settled into their home together, but romance never blossomed.
For one thing, Hazel didn't much care for Baltimore Jack. When Baltimore Jack himself died a few years later, we learned from the autopsy that there really was no chance of reproduction in the first place. We found out he was sterile.
The Old West lived on in one respect. Rodeos were big events in the 60s, with a rodeo circuit just for teens.
Arizona Junior Rodeo Association, I started in like 67 or 68. I was about 14. I started riding bulls, started falling off of bulls. It's real bumpy and blurry, and then all of a sudden the wind's knocked out of you and you've got dirt in your mouth. And you stand up and you go, hey, you know, did I do it? I mean, we did it for girls. It was the only reason we ever crawled on bulls was because the girls would be impressed by that.
With cheap land under development in every direction, where were the freeways? After the first was completed in 1960, all 7 miles of it, Phoenix became the city of missing freeways for the remainder of the decade. Yet there was no hiding the fact that this was a car culture, and the classic cars of the 60s could be found roaring up South Mountain on the weekend hill climbs.
Round, round, get around, I get around, yeah, get around, round, round, I get around, I get around, get around, round, round, I get around, get around, round, round, I get around,
But on weekend nights, if you were a teenager, you knew the place to be.
Cruising was probably the #1 activity of anybody, especially if you had a nice vehicle. And Central Avenue was, of course, the place to cruise.
This was a big deal. I mean, everybody, whether you were from the east side high schools like Arcadia or Camelback, or the west side high schools, where you met on Friday night was Cruising Central.
Started at Camelback and you turned around at McDowell at the library.
I told my mother we were going to the library, and well, we turned around there and came back north on Central.
And then you would go just north of Camelback Road and make a U-turn at the next street.
And show off your car, and then turn around and drive back down.
And then go south to McDowell, turn around the library parking lot, come back, go back north, just back and forth.
And that was it. I mean, you didn't deviate. You didn't go any farther south than McDowell. You didn't go any farther north than Bethany Home.
And you could do that for 3 or 4 hours.
I think it was more parking than cruising.
And you'd just sit there and you'd park and you'd watch people go back and forth and back and forth. And I don't think you put more than 3 miles on your car that night.
We finally got cars when we were in our senior year. So we all had 60s muscle cars, and we would drive down Cruising Central.
If you're out there cruising Central in the Shannon program tonight, how
Yes, Tuesday, November 7th is Pepsi's Family Day at the Pier.
Criz and Crux that was it. It was the top 40 on Criz, the top 40 on Crux, and you were either a Criz guy or a Crux guy. You couldn't be both.
If you listened to Crux, there was something genetically wrong with you. You know, Criz was the only station. And then 6 months later, all of a sudden, Crux was the only station. You could tell if a kid was your friend or not by what he, not what political party do you belong to, is what you listen to Criz or Crux, which is it, You're a Criz guy or a Crux guy.
And you would also get in the car with other people, boys you didn't even know, but if they had a great car, and you'd been seeing that car for 3 or 4 weeks, yeah, and and it was just very safe.
I still take my kids on Central, but it's not the same. They go, Mommy, I don't understand why you did this.
With the economy booming, people went looking for new places to shop, and developers were happy to oblige.
And then they built the first outdoor mall, which was Park Central Mall. And then after that, Christown Mall with air conditioning came in, and we were there. We never left Christown after they were built. We had evap coolers in our house, and when we were hot, we'd go hang out at the mall. It was a lot cooler.
Christown was the biggest air-conditioned mall in the nation, a risky development that once again paid off for Del Webb. It was only one of many malls that circled the city, spelling doom for downtown Phoenix. In the early 60s, downtown had still been the place to go.
A lot of your businesses and everything were centrally located right in that area because there were no suburbs. Everybody went downtown.
Armando Chavez witnessed the changes in downtown Phoenix from his father's barber shop on Washington Street.
A barber shop was a place where everybody in town would show up. Everybody knew everybody. And so you might be talking to the guy who's going to be the next governor of the state, or the mayor of the town, or one of the councilmen, or the chief of police. But yet, it's on a first-name basis, and they know you, they know your family, they know the whole neighborhood.
The social fabric began to unravel as larger businesses moved to the suburbs.
And that's when we started to see it turn to the blight and to all the problems that they had and all the drugs and all the bad stuff that the publicity was given to downtown in the late 60s, early 70s.
Downtown died in the 60s. I mean, it just went, it was sometime in the mid-60s when these guys turned around, woke up, looked at it and said, we don't have a city here any longer. We've got a huge metropolitan area, but we don't have a city core.
Although whites looked on Phoenix as a western city, the more than 20,000 black residents viewed it as a southern city. The discrepancy should not have been surprising given the very separate lives of black and white residents. Kay Butler worked as a ticket seller at the Palms Theater.
That was the first theater that was built without a balcony because desegregation had changed things and black people were no longer required to sit in the balcony. And so the Palms Theater had just one floor, some loge seats. The first time I had some black people ask me about that at the box office, they said, do you have a balcony? And I said, no, but we have very nice loge seats. And they were disheartened because they thought they couldn't come to the movie. You don't have the balcony, where can we sit?
Black residents all too often faced high unemployment, poor housing, and poor education. Civil rights demonstrations were one tool for change. Another strategy was used by local activists Lincoln Ragsdale and George Brooks, who targeted business leaders with private meetings.
So they went to these individuals, leaders of what is now Bank One of Arizona, leaders of Motorola, Sprayer-Iran, General Electric, and they said, listen, you need to open up your companies or this is going to happen. We have these protests ready. And the last thing you want are hordes of angry blacks marching through the streets of this desert oasis, demonstrating to people that in actuality, the Valley of the Sun isn't so bright for everybody that lives here. And the leader of the bank capitulated eventually because he didn't want this sort of attention. But the inside joke between Ragsdale and Brooks is, where are we going to get 500 African Americans to come march on this bank?
Change was happening, but at a glacial pace. People in the poorest part of South Phoenix felt no improvement.
The issue is economics. And the issue of police brutality was a very powerful issue within the African American communities. So the cauldron of all of these sort of feelings was about to bubble over. And it did bubble over on the 25th of July, 1967.
Rioting broke out with fires and looting. The mayor imposed a curfew and hundreds were arrested.
In most instances, those who pled guilty were fined $300 or were given 30 days in jail. The men all were given 30 days in jail. These may be rather stiff sentences, but these are rather extreme times. We're going to have law and order. That's all there is to it.
The riots were minor compared to what had taken place in other cities that summer, but they shocked Phoenix. The local news media groped for a way to explain it.
Now, what does the Birch Society feel is necessary to be done to solve this problem?
The first thing is to get the communists out of the so-called civil rights movement. We're not going to solve our problems destroying lives and property. Then the American people, both black and white, can sit down together, isolate these problems, analyze them, and begin to solve them.
The mayor promised more job training and jobs and better relations between police and minorities. City leaders faced the need to deal with the racial divide and quickly repair the city's national image. All those newcomers began to have an effect on the political landscape. Although a Democratic stronghold since territorial days, Arizona was ready for a sharp turn to the right.
Arizona's always had a very special place in my heart.
The change was signaled by the 1962 election year. Democratic Senator Carl Hayden had spent 50 years in Washington representing the state, and he seemed to have little to fear for re-election.
And in those days, for Arizona, the big issues were not philosophical. The big issues were development, and the Central Arizona Project was the big issue. And Carl Hayden was the father of the Central Arizona Project, and he had the seniority and the clout in the U.S. Senate to get it done.
But he wasn't well known to new voters. Hayden needed a jolt of publicity, so his campaign manager, Roy Olson, wrangled a rare presidential visit to Phoenix. The crowning event was a bipartisan dinner in honor of Hayden.
And it was just incredible, the coverage. They got an overnight. Everyone in the state of Arizona knew who Carl Hayden was.
They're watching all of this. This bipartisan event is a young maverick state senator named Evan Mecham, who has just been elected, and he doesn't go along with the rest of his colleagues. He says, what Republicans are supporting? The tax and spend liberal Carl Hayden. He's for big government. He's for taking away our individual rights. Someone has to do something about this.
Mecham decided he was the man. Running on an ultra-conservative platform, he played on the voters' fears of high taxes, one world government, and communist takeover.
He is a soldier. He is an anti-communist soldier. And that's a big part of his '62 campaign. And it really hits home.
I took it seriously, though a lot of people didn't. They thought he was a sort of a flake in a way.
The Hayden campaign played on the fear that if Senator Hayden wasn't reelected, Arizona would dry up and blow away from lack of water. And in the end, Hayden won re-election. But with 45% of the vote, Evan Mecham's strong showing anticipated what was to come.
The 1962 anti-communist, get government out of my pocket, all of that hits home. And you soon see a Republican governor, Jack Williams, and more Republicans. And pretty soon, by the 1970s, people think of Arizona as a Republican state.
Strange things were happening out in the desert. No less fantastic was the vision of developing towns as theme parks. The McCulloch Corporation built Fountain Hills, which outdid Lake Geneva in Switzerland with the world's highest fountain. To guarantee that it would always remain the world's highest, the company installed an extra pump, just in case. Then came Lake Havasu City with a fabricated English theme, but a very real London Bridge. The developer, Bob McCulloch, soon made it into the Guinness Book of World Records as owner of both the world's tallest fountain and the world's biggest antique, the London Bridge. Closer to Phoenix, Paradise Valley was incorporated as the area's most exclusive community. Developers had finally achieved the epitome of suburban living. The desert offered a very different opportunity to the space program. NASA decided that Meteor Crater was the best place on Earth to train for the moon landings. So Frank Borman returned to Arizona with the Apollo astronauts. It was a time of anticipation. The 60s were reaching a climax, and the people of the valley would experience it all. That twangy guitar sound, so much a part of rock music in the 60s, a sound that became a worldwide phenomenon and inspired thousands of teenagers to pick up the guitar, that sound was created here in Phoenix in a little recording studio at 7th Street in Weldon. The young guitarist was Duane Eddy.
By combining echoes of the tape recorders, they got a special water tank that they hooked up as also a source of echo, recombined the sound together on the tape recorder. It was the twang heard around the world. And you realize that this was something new. These guys weren't copying anything. They were creating something.
Duane Eddy soon became an international star, influencing countless performers like George Harrison of the Beatles. There were other national hits coming out of Phoenix. Funky Broadway was recorded in 1967 by Dyke and the Blazers.
In fact, there's a line in the song, every town I go in, there's a street, name of the street, Funky Broadway. And of course there was a Broadway out here in Phoenix which inspired him to write the song, which is written out here. As it turns out, Dyke met a very untimely, violent end. He was shot and killed in the parking lot of a bar very near Broadway, right here in Phoenix.
A happier twist in the story of local rock music came from the Wallace and Ladmo Show. Long before Spinal Tap, this TV show created a parody rock group called Hubcap and the Wheels. They became a surprise hit.
Ladies and gentlemen, you may have heard why you think the Beatles are exciting. These fellas run over the Beatles. Here they are, Hubcap and the Wheels.
Hey, just a second, guys. Excuse me. That's me, Pat McMahon, 35 years and 30 pounds ago as Hubcap. You know, we never expected a comedy act to turn into a real band, much less get on national TV. But the audience was in on the joke, and everybody had fun. Hit it, guys.
There's a bam-a-lam-a-loo, bam-a-lam-a, bam-a-loo, bam-a-lam-a, bam-a-loo. Well, I like her style. Yes, it drives me wild with bam-a-lam-a, bam-a-loo.
When you turn on Steve Allen, and all of a sudden Hubcap and the Wheels are on Steve Allen, well, we were cheering. That was our guys on Steve Allen. You know, one of our team made it.
There were tons of bands around and more venues to play. You play the high school show, you play for your church, you play for the club. There were a lot of places to play. And a lot of these bands would change, would quit, would break up, reform, and that sort of thing. The Earwigs became the Spiders, who became the Nazz, who became Alice Cooper over the years.
The Earwigs, of course, got our start on the Wallace and Ladmo Show. You know, when my mom made us yellow corduroy jackets, and you know, Pat McMahon interviewed us, and it was a big deal because we were on the Wallace and Ladmo Show.
Young Vincent Fournier, later to become rock star Alice Cooper, was just one of the many local talents to find opportunity in the busy local music scene.
But of course, that's what the 60s was all about, was becoming your own self, and the ability for you as a local band here in Arizona or Phoenix, wherever you were, to write your own music, to make your own record, and if you were lucky, you might get to hear that record on the radio.
Now the cool thing is to be driving along with your girl, trying to impress her. Your record comes on, and you go, and you'd switch it off. It's the ultimate and cool. You know, Saturday night, the Beatles play, the Stones play, and here's that new one, Don't Blow Your Mind by the Spiders. And I go, oh, yeah, I heard that before. I turn it up. Wow. I mean, you couldn't get any cooler than that.
Start walking.
How women viewed themselves at the beginning of the 60s was very different from how they viewed their roles at the end of the decade.
Everyone's mom stayed home in the 60s, everyone I knew, even my own mom. Even though my mom did volunteer work with everything, she was a stay-at-home mom. She was always there.
I don't know if kids from public school did this, but our office practice class, we were supposed to be wearing hats and gloves to apply for jobs. And the nuns just didn't know how things were. We knew enough that as soon as we left class, we would rip off the hat, but we still wore our little white gloves. I have boys that are 33 and 35, and they still find it hard to believe that there would be classified ads, help wanted female, help wanted male, and you'd better not cross that. You know, even if maybe my father had taught me to be an electrician, I need not apply. You know, that job is a man's job.
Right out of high school, I went into data processing because computers were the thing back then. So I went to Mesa Community College to learn that, and before I even got through school, my advisor said, "You probably won't be able to get a job." And I said, "Why?" And they said, "Well, for one thing, you're not a man."
What changed in the 60s was a change in attitudes. Women felt more freedom in pursuing individual lifestyles and careers, but true job equality would have to wait for a later decade.
One of these days, these boots are gonna walk all over you.
Hispanic women, on the other hand, had a different set of concerns.
The feminist movement or the women's movement was usually a white women's movement. And whereas the Chicano movement was a movement that included the family, men, women, children, to overcome issues that related to classism and racism and not so much feminism.
Despite some progress resulting from the civil rights movement, the Hispanic population continued to wrestle with low-paying jobs and poor education. Dissatisfied with the slow progress of mainstream politics, a new generation of college-educated Hispanic activists took a more radical approach.
Confrontational politics, not being afraid to challenge anyone or make statements. You had the young students who were now from a different generation, maybe becoming educated and becoming a little bit more articulate, making demands on the older generation of politicians who had been in office for quite some time, maybe a little bit complacent about their responsibilities to help the poor, and now being challenged by these young leaders and young students.
The late 60s were a proving ground for leaders like Alfredo Gutierrez, one of the founders of Chicanos por la Causa, who would initiate new community programs and legislation in coming years. Many of Arizona's youth felt a call to duty. In the mining town of Morenci, 9 high school buddies enlisted in the Marines on Independence Day, 1966. They expected to serve in Vietnam, and they were right. What they didn't expect was that 6 of the 9 would return in coffins. There were many tragedies in that war, but this one sent shockwaves across Arizona. The problems of the outside world were intruding on the age of optimism. The rest of the 60s was a rush of social and political change. The conviction of local resident Ernesto Miranda was overturned by Phoenix attorneys pleading before the U.S. Supreme Court. It resulted in the famous Miranda warning. Meanwhile, the youth culture flowered with the rise of the counterculture.
You'd see kids, at the end of this one school year, you'd leave and you'd come back in September, and all of a sudden this kid's like a freak. He's got leather fringe, and he's beads and flowers, and wow, this guy got hip over the summer.
Hippies took up residence on Mill Avenue in downtown Tempe, where marijuana was said to be sold on street corners. The one thing shared by hippies, the police, and the newspapers was an obsession with dope. Inevitably, the live and let live attitude of Tempe made it ground zero for the counterculture.
The students were the source of the counterculture in those days. You had the anti-war movement going on in the late 60s. You had the Chicanos por la Causa was pretty active out at ASU. You could hang with people who were like you, and so forth, and it became quite the little counterculture hub.
In a decade of growing pains, it was refreshing to find something that united everyone. The Phoenix Suns. Typical of the times, the momentous deal was launched by a few individuals making a few phone calls.
I mean, it came in a very fast timetable. I remember the guy that really brought the Suns was a guy named Dick Block. I remember Dick saying, you know, I think we got a shot at getting an NBA franchise. Do you want to be in on it? And I said, sure. I said, this, you know, so we got going on it.
Jerry Colangelo flew in from snowy Chicago to lead the franchise, which wasn't an overnight success.
We had a name the team contest. We had, quite honestly, I'll admit to you, we had picked the name we wanted, Suns, and fortunately there were a number of entries that had the word Suns in it. But we only sold 800 season tickets that first year, and I remember how frustrated I was. But the following summer, we doubled our season ticket sales to 1,600. We signed Connie Hawkins from the ABA. We drafted Neil Walk. We made a couple of trades, one for Paul Silas. And we went from 16 wins to 39 wins in the biggest turnaround in the history of the NBA. We made the playoffs.
The arrival of the Suns probably would have earmarked the time and at that era that we'd finally arrived, that we were finally starting to get some consideration as being a major metropolis, a city that was on the rise.
During the 60s, Phoenix more than doubled in size to 250 square miles. And when development reached Camelback Mountain, it went right up the slopes. That disturbed people who loved the sight of the landmark mountain, and public indignation led to a ban on construction above 1,800 feet.
Phoenix had a plan, and they wanted to grow, but they realized at some point that they had to preserve certain aspects, certain landmarks, certain things, because this was a city without a soul. This was a city with mercantilism in its heart.
One of the most remarkable development plans had no profit motive. Architecture students at ASU, led by Dean James Elmore, offered a solution for the great scar left by the dry riverbed called Rio Salado.
And I think that this exciting plan will be adopted eventually by the community. When, I don't know, but I'm excited about it right now.
Although finally built as Tempe Town Lake, the project was held up for decades, while commercial projects marched across the valley.
I think the character of Phoenix has changed a lot. It's such a sprawl without any true identifying characteristics that I can really pick up on. They don't seem to have that identifying central Phoenix feeling that you would wish for. I'm not sure that it existed back then either, but I think we've almost missed our chance with it.
Did city leaders miss an opportunity to control growth? Or did the massive migration of the 60s make sprawl inevitable?
I think the state attracts a personality, a kind of an independent, kind of a free-thinking personality. I think that person comes here. They've got their hopes and their dreams all wrapped up in this place. There was this, sense of community here, but in a way kind of a wildcat community. It was just a lot of individuals that probably weren't the best at building a community. They all had their own objectives, their own agendas, and they kind of would build those, and where those overlapped, something came out of that. But I think a lot of it was just by happenstance, the way it worked out.
The Phoenix that grew out of the 60s is still a young city with its share of growing pains.
I think Phoenix and I grew so gradually and, developed a certain level of sophistication. I think Phoenix and I grew at the same time, and, and now we both need a little work. I've grown a little too much, and probably Phoenix has.
According to some experts, the ultimate legacy of the 60s may not be sprawl, but the beginnings of a truly modern city.
I've attended lectures where the speaker is telling us all how horrible we must feel living here, and everybody in the room kind of looks at each other saying, I've never had it so good. The most optimistic view that I can give of the valley is that something new is happening here. It's a place of great experimentation. I like to think of it as like an adolescent. You know, what it's about to become is not yet known. It's not yet manifest at that age. That's how I think of the valley.
Frank Borman returned to space in 1968. This time, he commanded the first manned spacecraft to circle the moon.
Yeah, you're looking pretty small down there now, Houston.
When it was his turn to gaze out the window, Borman's attention left the moon. He grabbed a camera to capture one of the most enduring images of the 1960s.
Good day, sunshine. Good day, sunshine. Good day, sunshine. I need to laugh, and when the sun is out, I've got something I can laugh about. I feel good in a special way. I'm in love and it's a sunny day. Good day, sunshine.